All right. Well, I'm Christian, for people who don't know me. So I've got a lot of information in this slide. I tried my presentation last night, and I ran way over time. So what I'm going to try to do today is kind of go a little faster, maybe skip some parts. But what I also want to do is I want people to ask questions as I go along and not wait till the end, because we're not going to have time at the end. I'm going to go to the very end. So if you have a pressing question, just shout it as I'm presenting, and it's going to be topical to the area that I'm going to be at. So feel free to interrupt. And we'll get the food when it gets here. So right now, I don't know if I'm getting your undivided attention or you're just taking food. We'll see. So walking in England. So this is the third year in a row that I go to England. And this time around, I thought I'd do something a little different. And I decided I want to do some walks. I'd watched some shows that actually they show you all the types of different walks you can do in England. There's like canal walks, there's like railway walks that you can do and all of that. So that's what I decided to do. So really my trip this year concentrated just around this area. And I've kind of seen the rest of it in my other trips, but in this presentation, it will only be the southern part of England. So I also used a story map. I wanted to do a story map because people have used it before, and I thought this is topical for a mapping company. And what I'm going to do is after the presentation, I'm going to actually give you the link to that story map. There's actually a lot of stuff written in the story maps. I've actually written it for people to read the story map, not to read during the presentation. So maybe don't spend any time reading it as I'm going through, because it's actually just meant for after when you're perusing it. So my trip started on May 21st, and I landed in London. So London is very expensive for hotels, and there's one hotel chain that I've used in the last few years that I really like called Premier Inn, but they also have what they call the Hub, which is even more compact than a Premier Inn, and it's quite interesting because these rooms are super modern. They have all sorts of electronic stuff, and you actually download an application. You can control everything about your room with the application. And the only thing is that it doesn't have any windows. So what happened is the first night when I got there, well, I got there during the day, and I did a bit of visiting. But when I went to bed that night, I went to bed around midnight, and I got up around 3 in the morning from jet lag, stayed up for about 2 hours, then went back to sleep. And then the next day, I was planning on starting early and doing one of my first walk. I wake up, look at my phone, it says 12. I was like, well, my phone ran out of batteries or something? No, it was actually noon. I actually slept till noon, didn't realize it. So these rooms are great, except that they're so dark that you don't even know, because there's no windows, you can't tell what time it is. So the very first day when I arrived, it was nice and sunny, so I thought, okay, well, let's start walking right away. So what I did is I started from my hotel around here. Now this part here is the City of London, which is different than just London. The City of London is the old Londinium that the Roman had built in 40 AD. And it's kind of like a walled area. Well, you can't really see the wall. There's some remnants of the walls. But I started from there, and then I walked to the south. This is the South Bank, where all the cool pubs and things are in the evening. And then I came back around in the embankment side, back to my hotel. What's interesting here is that I'm standing on London Bridge, looking at Tower Bridge. A lot of people think that this is London Bridge, but this is actually Tower Bridge. When I walked across, right across around here is Borough Market, but at this time it was closed because it's around 6 at night. Then I walked all the way to the London Eye. And what's interesting is the London Eye, the first time I saw it was right after it was built in 2000, and at the time it was called the Millennium Wheel, but now it's the London Eye. And here you can tell I'm pretty strong. I can lift. Now, most people will think this is Big Ben, but it actually isn't Big Ben. Big Ben is the actual clock inside of the tower. So this is the clock tower, and it's part of the Palace of Westminster. But the clock is actually inside. Now, people clearly call this Big Ben, but it's a misnomer. And what's interesting about Big Ben is that for the next three years, if you're going to go to London, you're not going to actually hear it, because they're making repairs to Big Ben, so you can actually hear it ring on the quarter of hour. This is one of the lions that I'll show you on the map. This is where the city of Westminster turns into the city of London. So that as you're going through, there's two of these lions that guard kind of the city of London.
Is that a griffin? Is that a griffin?
Well, it's a dragon kind of thing. Yeah. I've put some links to wiki pages, so whenever you're looking at it, you can click and get more details. So all the way through it, if you see CMap when you're reading my story map, it will show you stuff on the map. And if you click on some of the hyperlinks, it will often take you to a Wikipedia page. So on the first day, first full day, what I wanted to do is start an actual walk, because I went to England to do some walking. So the first one that I wanted to do was in London. There's actually a canal called the Regents Canal, and it's a nice walk that you can do. And it's right in the north of London. You're walking right in the city, but you can't even tell you're in the city because you're right next to that canal. And what's interesting about canals is that they used to have this path next to it for the horses, because they would actually pull the barges full of merchandise. So all the canals always have a nice walking path next to it. And in this case, they've even paved some of it, like you can see it down there. And it was shared both by pedestrians and bicycles. So you have to be a little careful because the bikes could be coming towards you. What's interesting too is the people walk on the other side in England. So I was never sure where I should walk. But also because I was walking this way, technically I should have been walking along the water, but I was a little worried about that. So I kept walking on this side. But you could tell that the Londoners weren't necessarily mean about it, but like you could tell that I was walking towards them and they'd be like moving around. But so once in a while I would move away, but like I didn't really like the idea of walking the whole 18 kilometers right next to the water. They didn't, but the thing is I was also listening to an audiobook at the same time, so I couldn't hear, like I was more worried about bicycle coming behind me and startling me and like and then next thing you know you fall in. So the image I've got here is from a store that I really like in England. It's called Pret-à-Manger or Pret-à-Manger. And it's kind of like in England, what they do is they do a lot of to-go meals, right? Because people take the train everywhere. So it's a society where they will often just grab a sandwich at a convenience store or at a grocery store and a soda and everything. So usually you get what they call a £3 meals. So you can go to Tesco, any of these, and you get a sandwich, a Coke, and a chip or variation of these three for £3, which is a really good deal. So. And it's perfect when you also want to travel quickly. I don't want to waste an hour or two trying to find a place for lunch. Maybe at nighttime you want to try something nice, but at lunchtime you might want to go quickly. This one is more of a higher end place where they sell sandwich. But so I grabbed one of these for the start of my walk. The walk actually starts at a place called Limehouse Basin. And this used to be the place where all the shipping started from for all the canals. Now it's not used for that anymore, but it fell into disarray for maybe 50 years, and now it's kind of more rejuvenated as kind of an urban area. What's interesting is they had this thing here, which is like a community book exchange right next to it. So you go there, open the door, grab a book, put a book. And it was actually the first one on the canal system that I read. So as you go along those canals, what's interesting is that it's a series of locks, right? Because the water is not at the same height the whole way. So what they had to do is they had to use the locks to allow the ships to go from one kind of river system to the next. And basically, I think there's 16 different locks as you're going along. And I got to see a couple of these in operations. And often they will actually have a house next to the lock where somebody lives there. That's the lock operator. So they'll come out and operate the lock for you. Yeah, I think it's kind of a wheel that they turn, and it just opens up kind of the gate, the water floods in, and then it's kind of nice. So you can see it here, like the water is at the same level, the boat would go in, and then they would lower it, and then go to the next one. They have a lot of really nice barges along the canal, so I took a couple of pictures of the different ones. One part of that walk, I had to actually walk inland because they actually have a tunnel that goes under Islington. And this whole area, you kind of have to get out of the canal and kind of walk on the ground. And then it's a bit tough to know where to get the canal again, but Google Maps helped me for that. They actually had a floating bookstore along the canal, which was really cool. This is a permanent mooring, so this store is always there. And he actually, so it's kind of on a barge and you can buy books. What I didn't realize starting my walk is that halfway through it, I was going to go through Camden Lock, which is Camden, I don't know if you've been there, but I went there last year for the first time, and it's a really cool market. And what they used to have stables at Camden, and they've converted all these old stables into little shops and stuff. And as you're walking along, you can actually get off the canal and go into the area. They have like food stalls and everything. So I went in, did a little bit of a tour around, and actually I found this store that had a micro distillery. So they do the distilled gin with this very tiny still, which was pretty cool. So I got to sample some, and I brought some back. This is an aviary that you see along the walk. This is part of the London Zoo. What's interesting about walking along a canal is you often don't realize what's right next to you because you're kind of a little lower. And what I realized doing my presentation is that I actually walked right next to Abbey Road, which is, I think, in this area. So I could have gone off for 10 minutes and then walked Abbey Road. But I did that before in a previous trip, so that's not a problem. But it's kind of interesting that if somebody was planning a trip along a canal, you might actually want to know what's outside, and once in a while just get off the canal, visit something, and come back in. So when you're on the canal, a lot of people, young people in England, they can't afford to live in London because it's too expensive. So a lot of them will actually buy an old barge, which is still expensive. I think it's maybe 20 grand. But then you can actually just live on your barge. Now, you can't really stay in the same spot all the time. You can park for maybe a week or two, but then some people will go like, okay, you move, this is a public area. We want that spot too. But there's a couple of places where it's permanent mooring. And you can see, like, when you walk to that area, they actually have like power plugs and everything, and you're walking over some cables. So these people actually get a permanent mooring permit. And at the end of the canal is what they call Little Venice. And that's also kind of a nice area of town. That evening, I actually had the show plan. Before I go on a trip, I usually take a look at all the plays that are going on. And I often try to take plays where there's food there. Give me 2 minutes to finish that slide, and we'll go for food. So often what I'll do is I'll take a look at all the plays that are there and see who's in the play, see if they're actors, British actors that I know, and I'll often choose plays according to that. So this play that I chose is because David Tennant was headlining this play. It's called Don Juan in Soho. And what's interesting is that I go there, and I had picked some nice seats, right in front of the stage, maybe 5 rows back. And the place was filling up, and there was about 2 minutes left, and there's like 3 seats next to me that the only seats that are not taken in the theater. I'm like, who would buy some nice tickets like that and not show up? So all of a sudden, like these 2 ladies are coming down the aisle, and then they walk by, and then this other guy comes in. I was like, hold on, is that Stephen Moffat? So for people who know or don't know, Stephen Moffat is actually the showrunner of Doctor Who. And he's the one who wrote some of the best episodes, like Blink and stuff like that. So he actually sat down right next to me, but I wasn't sure it was him. So it was about a minute before the show started. And he's kind of looking at his phone, and I'm trying to see if I could recognize whether it's him or not. But you don't want to be looking like this, so I'm kind of trying to look like this. And all of a sudden, he opens up this email and this image, and it's actually a TARDIS from Doctor Who. I'm like, okay, it's him. So he puts his phone away. I'm like, excuse me, are you Stephen Moffat? He's like, well, yeah. So that was kind of cool. So he took a picture with me. Of course, the problem is at the end of the show, I wanted to go get a signature from David Tennant, an autograph, right? You go to the backstage door, but then the usher came out and said, well, to the people that were there, they were like, it could take a while because, he's got some guests today, so it's going to take a while. And of course, I knew which guests he was talking about, right? So I actually didn't get to see David Tennant that night because we waited about 45 minutes and he wasn't coming out. But I saw a couple of more actors that I've actually, this guy's from Blunt Talk, if you've watched it, and this guy is another actor that I watch from my British shows. Let's get some pizza. What's that?
What's the price for the one?
The room, it was probably still like 120, 150.
1%.
Yeah. Well, you can be 2 in there, but it's a little crammed. Yeah.
How's it going in here?
I'm going too slow. I'm gonna have to speed it up.
Fun stuff.
I'm only on D3.
Is SMJ here?
I don't know.
All right, cool.
No, I don't think so.
Because SMJ.
I'm being recorded.
Oh, why?
It won't go over.
Yeah.
No, I'll stop on time, but
Yeah, that's okay.
I'll have to speed up.
The thing is. If not, we can go to like.
Yeah, let's go to 1. Take a seat, guys. Let's make sure people can get in.
So last Tuesday, I actually attended this one.
I'm like on the wrong area. Should not be standing right there. Yeah. That's what I miss. Catch me up on the 3 days.
So
Let me redo it for you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Didn't actually say much of that.
Was this in the Cotswolds?
No, Cotswold is way down.
and also encourage you.
I'll come back for that part. I don't care about it.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound interesting. Stephen Moffat's great. Is it Moffat or Moffat?
Moffat, I guess.
Random.
Mark,
Yeah.
I've already decided that walking tours are better than going on wilderness hikes.
Oh, I've done some walking tours in London. Did you do any walking tours in London? Is that what you're talking about?
That's what I just talked about. Walked along the canal.
Did you do there's this...
What's that?
Did you like have a book on like different walks, like nice walks you can do, like walking tour type book?
I looked at that before I went. I was thinking like maybe I'll book a tour where you actually just walk in one direction for 5 days and they take your bags from one place to the next, except that it's on a specific time and you don't know if it's going to be nice or not. It could be raining the whole time. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to nix that and do like my own kind of trips. Yeah.
And this is your solo, right?
Yep.
Walking tours? Did you like do it with an organization?
What was that?
Did you do it with an organization?
Yeah.
So yeah, they have some, last time I was in London, they have like this walking tours line.
Yeah. Oh, no, I did some of those, but they weren't free. I took the paid one. You know, I think we're going to get going again because I got a lot of stuff to cover. So one of the things that happened is the night before when I went to sleep, this was the night that they had the Manchester bombing. And this is the next day. So you can see there's a lot of police around because all of England was under higher alert. And but the cops, even though they're everywhere, they're really friendly. Like they're not assholes. Like, you know, they'll chat, they'll pose with people. But the whole time I was in England, there was definitely a bigger police presence. I'm going to speed it up a little bit. So the next, I spent a couple of nights at the hubs. That was just to get into London. After that, I had booked 7 nights in Brixton. Now, Brixton is a little suburb of London. It's actually in the south of London. This is kind of the Jamaican town. That's where a lot of the Jamaican people live. And so I booked it. It was a really small room, but it was nice because it was like it was only $50 a night, which was great, you know, because I was right next to the tube station. It took me not even 10 minutes to get to London, so it was perfect, you know, for spending a week. This is Electric Avenue is actually in Brixton. Now, you've heard the song Electric Avenue. The reason it is called Electric Avenue, it's because this was the first market street that got electricity, so that's why it's called Electric Avenue.
How do you go to Brixton? Take the train or bus?
To get there? Yeah, the tube, the subway, right? So I picked up a place that was right next to, like 5 minutes, not even 5 minutes from the subway station. And this was on the Victoria line, which is also the line that has access to all the train station, which is great because I had a train pass. That day I had booked a show to see The Philanthropist because these were all actors that I knew and I was looking forward to it. Not necessarily the play, but I was looking forward to these actors. This was a theater right next to Trafalgar Square. So what I did is I just had a quick meal before the show. Now, I'll quickly mention some of the people in that show in case you know him. This is Matt Berry. He's the guy from the IT Crowd. Also, The Toast of London. This is a guy from In-Betweeners. That's the guy from Plebs and Friday Night Dinner. And she's in called The Midwife, although I've never watched it, but she's in a lot of other shows that I like Siblings. So the next day, there's a friend that I met when I went into my Scandinavian tour. So when you book a Scandinavian tour, you can book as a single person and it'll actually match you with somebody if somebody else is single. So I ended up with this guy in Scandinavia called David, and it turned out this very nice gentleman, 60-year-old, likes traveling. And I was talking to him, telling him that I was going to be in England. He's from California, and he says, oh, I'm going to be in England at the same time. So we actually had planned to meet. So we were going to meet the next day because that was the only day that I didn't have any shows planned. But he said, well, let's meet the day before to plan the next day. So I said, okay, how about going to lunch at Borough Market? Have you been there? And he had not been there, so it's perfect. So we go to Borough Market. Borough Market is an amazing place. We went there last year. Jordan was there at the same time. We had some Ethiopian food. It's just amazing. Like there's a lot of food stalls, and there's also a lot of places where you can buy cheeses and meats, and they let you sample all that stuff. So that was really great. Now, clearly, I'm happy that I actually went to Borough Market at that time because a week and a half later, that's when they had the stabbing, and the market was closed. So I'll talk about it at the end. One of the market that was pretty cool is that they sell this cheese called Blue Brain. It's actually blue cheese, and it doesn't look good, but it's very tasty. So what we did is after Borough Market, we decided, okay, let's go do a walking tour. There's a lot of walking tour you can do in London. So you just show up. There's a website. They tell you show up at this station at this time, and there's going to be a guide, and you just give him £10 as you get there. No need to reserve. So we were going to do a tour. The only tour that fit at that time was a tour of the old London. and it started right next to St. Paul's Cathedral. So this guy was kind of explaining, you can see here the borders of the city of London, and he was kind of explaining what was going on. I don't know if he had a problem with the Tower of London, but he seems to be giving it the finger. So the tour started right next to the Tower of London, or got to the Tower of London. And so that night, I actually had planned another show. I was going to go see Annie. Not that I'm a fan, I had never seen the movie, but the actress, Miranda Hart, was one of the actresses I wanted to see. She's from one of the shows that I like. She's also in Call of the Midwife, which again, I haven't seen. Just before the show, we grabbed a quick meal. This is actually from Jamie Oliver's Italian food. Like, he's got a couple of different restaurants around town. So this was one of Jamie Oliver's restaurants. So I just got like a charcuterie plate. It was kind of nice. Show was really good. Of course, there's a lot of kid actors in that show, and they were just funny and really talented. So it was kind of fun. Got to take a picture with the actress. I'm going to speed up a little bit. So the day that we had planned the next day, we decided to go to Bletchley Park. A lot of you are familiar with Bletchley Park. That's where they did all the research during World War II to try to decipher the Russian Enigma Machine. Sorry, the German Enigma Machine. And so this is one of the Enigma Machine. There's a bunch of different ones. Sometimes they have more wheels and sometimes less wheels. So they had to improve on their algorithm to figure it out. And this is one of the machines they used to do that. Alan Turing created this called the Bombe Machine. And I think they set all the dials, and then this tells them how to actually set the dials on the Enigma Machine. And then at some point they started using, so right next to Bletchley Park, there's actually they call it the Museum of Computing. And it's only open like one day a week, and it happened to be on that day, so that was good. So we went there, and they have all sorts of old computers. But one of the ones that they have is a Colossus, which is technically the oldest computer. Now, for the longest time, we didn't know this was the oldest computer because it was classified. So it's only when they declassified it that we realized that it was actually older than the computer that the American were saying was the first computer. So this is actually the oldest computer. On the way back from Bletchley Park, by the way, Bletchley Park, is it worth visiting? I don't know. It's a lot of reading. It's cool to see the machines, but it was a little bit dry. Like I'm not sure everybody would find it interesting, because you need to read everything. There's nothing happening. You're just reading. On the way back, we stopped at King Cross Station. This is a classic Harry Potter 9 3/4 gate. So people go there, and good luck trying to get a picture in front of that. I took a picture of someone because there's a huge lineup, and he actually charged you to take a picture of it. Like, it doesn't look like there's a big lineup, but the lineup is all over there. But it's kind of cool. So what they do is they take the picture, and they have a scarf, and what the guy will do is he will hold the scarf, and then he'll say, go, and the person is supposed to jump, and the scarf is kind of falling down, so it gives the impression that they were running into the wall. Magic. We quickly, after that, we went for Nando's. Love Nando's. I had never tried it when it was in Victoria, and I fell in love with it last year, and then I realized that now they've closed the one in Langford, so right now there's no Nando's around, but apparently they're going to open a new one. So after that, we decided we were going to do a Jack the Ripper tour. So again, we just showed up at the right spot. Now what you're seeing behind this guy is actually the wall, the old Roman wall of London, right? So you can still see parts of it here and there. Now, the tour was pretty good. Like, he explained all the stuff about the murders. They don't know how many victims there was. They're not exactly sure. One of the things is that most of the places where the victims were found, these places have been built over, so you can't actually see how it was when it was there. But this is the same area, and this is an example of a street that is kind of representative of what those narrow streets would have looked like in the time of Jack the Ripper. There's also the 10 Bells pub that still exists. This was a pub that did exist at the time, and 2 of the victims actually frequented that pub. So you can, apparently if you go in, you shouldn't really talk about Jack the Ripper because people don't like it in the bar when you do that. But and right next to that is Spitalfields Market. When I was there that evening, it was kind of closed. Well, there was restaurants, but the area about the market was closed. I got to see it the next day, and this was my friend from California. He was leaving the next day. What's interesting is he was leaving, but I had a train pass for the whole month that I bought in standard class, and he had a train pass that was good for not consecutive, but it was good for 8 days, and he only had used 6. So I was like, can I use your ticket? Because it was a first class ticket, and I knew I needed to go to Cornwall in a couple of days. So he's like, yeah, sure. So he gives me the ticket, and I'm thinking, oh, that's great. I'm going to be able to use that. And then as I got home, I started reading it, and it's a ticket for seniors, right? So I was like, whoa, I wonder if the controller in the train is going to pick that up. So I said, I don't know, I might try it. And I actually did try it. It was fine. So the next day, I decided, okay, I want to see a part of England that I haven't seen. So I wanted to see Canterbury, which is kind of the southeast of England. And this is also the heart of the Anglican religion in England. So that's the Canterbury Cathedral is where they have the Archbishop.
Did you reserve a tour beforehand or the one day?
Well, these are tours I'm doing myself. So I'm taking the train down and I'm just walking around. So there's only one time the trip that I did one tour, and I'll explain it a little later. But all these tours is me just going around. This is just like, there's a few cities like that in England where you can do punting tours. Like I did one in Cambridge 2 years before. It's kind of nice. They usually have like the punters just taking you along. And if it's a nice day, it's kind of nice to go through the river. Canterbury is a really nice little quaint town. It's got some really old stuff. Like this is, for example, the Greyfriars Chapel, which is the oldest in England. This is a fortified city, just like York, where there's a wall around most of the city. And it's always kind of nice walking along the fortified wall. This is interesting. If you know about the stories, the Canterbury Tales, the author of these tales, Geoffrey Chaucer, is from Canterbury. And they actually recently, that's a fairly new statue, they wanted to put a statue of him, but they didn't have money for it. So they asked people, the alumni of the city, to give money to build a statue. And they said, if you give us a certain amount of money, we're going to put your face on the statue. And one of the person that actually gave money for that is Orlando Bloom, who actually studied in Canterbury. But the running joke is that you look all around, you look at all the faces, and you can't figure out which one is Orlando Bloom. You just can't. So I took a picture. I have a feeling that maybe this was Orlando Bloom, but I can't tell. So this is the Canterbury Cathedral. It's really big. And this is a pretty cool house. They said it's the most photographed house in Canterbury because it's kind of like slanted. Like I think it's about to fall down at one point, but like it's at the end of a street, and it's kind of cool to see. That night, I was going to see another show. Anybody here know Count Arthur Strong? No, too obscure. Let's move on. I was still staying in Brixton, and what's interesting is Brixton, as I said, is kind of a Jamaican area. And they have a lot of really good atmosphere. And this was on a Friday night. And they actually had, I was just coming out of the tube station before going to my house. And then like people are just hanging out and dancing. Steel drums and everything. So the next day I wanted to go around London and see some of the sites like in different neighborhoods that I didn't get to see. So I'm assuming some of you here have watched Misfits. And one of the things in Misfits is you got those four pretty iconic buildings that you always see. So I actually made my way to the area where you can actually see these buildings in England. And it's kind of, it's not too far from the city center. And I just had to take a kind of a commuter train to get there. And this is actually a really poor area though. Like you can tell like this is kind of like the projects, right? And it was a bit run down, but there was kind of a nice park right behind it. And there's this really nice horse that was just super friendly. I got to pet him. Didn't react, just kept on eating his food. The other place I wanted to see, I watched all the British shows. I wanted to go see the BBC. Now the BBC in 2010, they actually changed location. They used to be at the television center, and now they're in the new building, which funnily is called the Old Broadcasting House. And the thing is, there's really nothing to see there. So I got there, I kind of looked around, but you couldn't see anything. So then I said, let's make my way to the old BBC place. And what's interesting is that the old television center in White City is actually being turned into condos. This is a listed building, so they can't demolish it. So what they're doing is they're building kind of condos around it, making a whole kind of like a nice area for people to live in. So it was under construction when I saw it. I saw this couple taking wedding pictures, and I was thinking like, wow, you got to be pretty lucky when you're in London because you can take wedding pictures in pretty fantastic locations. So these guys are actually right in front of this. So that's some nice wedding pictures right there. The other place I wanted to see was Battersea Power Station. This is kind of an old historic power station, and this one they were going to demolish And actually, it turns out that they're going to do the same thing. They're going to do high-end condo development. This is kind of what it's going to look like when it's done. So it's in the middle of it right now. And if you've ever seen this, we see it on like a lot of artwork and like pop culture. On the way back to Brixton, I had a nice jerk chicken that they're doing over there. Next day, what I wanted to do is I wanted to do a couple of things I've never done when I was in London is go see some of the museums. And one of the museums that you can see is the Tate Modern. All the museums are free. Most of the museums are free in England because they believe in the fact that people should be able to get cultures and not have to be rich to do it. Now, what's interesting about this building is it used to be another power station, the Bankside power station, and it's got a huge turbine room. It's massive, and when you go in there, they often have like a special exhibit, like somebody will create a modern art just for the turbine room. It'll be some fantastic things. There's actually nothing in it when I was there because it was in between exhibits, so there was nothing constructed. Well, there's a lot of stuff to see, but not in the turbine room. So some of the stuff that you might recognize, this is Dali's lobster telephone. And this is the fountain from Duchamp. Now, this is an interesting one. This was done in 1917. This isn't actually the real one because it was lost. But in 1917, he wanted to enter the New York exhibit. And the only rule was that as long as you paid the fee, you were in to exhibit your stuff. So the guy created this, took a urinal, put it on his side, called it a fountain. They refused to allow him to display. So in 1960, the artist recreated 17 other copies of it, and this is one of the copies that you can see. This one is really interesting. This is kind of a live art performance. This was in, I think, 1970 or 72 in Naples. This lady put that table with all these objects on it, and she was going to be the centerpiece of this exhibit. And the people would come in, and for the next 4 hours, she would just not do anything. She would stand there, and people would do whatever they want with the stuff and with her. So it started with, like people would kind of like put makeup on her and stuff like that. They weren't too sure. It was a bit awkward. They didn't know what to do. But as things progressed, I was reading on Wiki, they said that by hour 3, all of her clothes had been slashed with razor blades. And then by hour 4, she had no more clothes. People were actually using the blades on her at one point. And what that did is that because she was kind of extricated herself of her will, like she would let people do whatever they needed to do, and she would have even let them kill her if they had to. What happened is that half of the people in there started to become protectors, like they felt that they needed to protect her, and half were like more of the attacker. And at one point, one of the guy took the gun and put it to her head, and then somebody just kind of smashed it off, and apparently there was a brawl in the audience. And then after 4 hours, or however long that was, she just stood up, because I guess she was sitting at the time, she just stood up, walked out, and that was the end of the live performance. So apparently it was insane. But this is a reproduction of all the objects. It was a list of 72 objects. I've got a link to it if you guys want to read more about it. Some of the other stuff, you got another Salvador Dali. And once I was done, I decided to go and do a walking tour of modern art, street art. So what you do is you follow the guide, and it'll take you around the city and take you all to the spots where there's actually artists that have done stuff on the street. And what's interesting is that this changes all the time because these get painted over and some new ones get done, so you never know what you're going to see. One of the ones that I did see is this one is from Banksy. So if you don't know Banksy, Banksy is one of these artists that nobody knows who it is, or he is, or she is, I'm assuming. And the thing is that he will do all sorts of political comments and stuff like that and do art piece around the world. And this was one of his, the pink card. Now they've encased it. It used to be just like that, but they were afraid people were going to graffiti it, so they've enclosed it. So there's a lot of really cool street art. A lot of it is around Brick Lane. And there's also some in Shoreditch, which is East London area. And then once this was done, I was right next to Brick Lane, and as we'd gone through during the tour, they had all these food stalls, and I was like, oh, that looks so good. So I went back for some food, and it was kind of the end of the day, and they actually were almost giving the food away because they're trying to get rid of it before they have it to pack up. So I got some really nice food for very cheap. On the way back in Brixton, I decided to go around and visit a bit of Brixton. Brixton has a lot of old arcades and areas. It was kind of closing at this time, so that's why some of the gates are closed, but it's like kind of really cool old-style arcades that you can see in Brixton. The next day, I wanted to go to Croydon. Now, Croydon is also in the south of London. Why Croydon? Well, I keep hearing, I was watching shows and people kept saying Croydon, lived in Croydon. I was like, okay, let's go see Croydon. I didn't even know if it was a nice city or a bad city or anything like that. I'm like, I'm just going to go and see Croydon. So I take the train to Croydon and I start walking around. It's kind of nice. They have like an old part of the city and they have like a minster. And I was going around. I was like, wow, this is really nice. This is the city hall. That's the minster. And all of a sudden, I get into an area where street art. And the day before, I'd just seen a lot of street art. And then I realized that this was an amazing city for street art. And in fact, I looked it up when I was doing the presentation. It turns out that they say it's the mecca of street art, like just so many. I couldn't put all of it in here, but I just put some samples. And you just walk around, and it's really nice street art everywhere. And I think they do respect the artists, so nobody is necessarily graffitiing over these. And it was pretty cool. Like you had like murals all along. Some really funny one. This place is called the St. George Walk. They were going to destroy it because they were going to build something new, and eventually that fell through. And what's interesting is you can actually see a lot of art along the way, but I'm lucky that it was actually closed that day, so I got to see it, because if it was midday, all of these gates would have been open and I couldn't have seen any of it. So just a lucky one. This is from David Hollier. That's an artist that does these styles of famous people, always using words to represent images. So that's Churchill. On the way back, I realized that you could see Battersea Station. It's interesting because I always wanted to see Battersea Station, and I realized this time around that you see it from everywhere. You're on a train, Battersea Station. For some reason, I'd never seen it before. All the other times I've been to London, you can see it from anywhere. When I went back to Brixton, what's interesting is they have a lot of air boutiques. Like they have like wig stores, air store, and it's just everywhere. Like the quantity of stores all in the same area is just insane. I got a nice little burger. It's a good thing we're not seeing all these pictures before you had your food, because you would really have hated me. Next day I was going from London into Cornwall. Cornwall is a place I've always wanted to see. It's at the west side of England. And so that was kind of a rainy day, so it was fine because I was on the train. It was like a 6-hour train ride. And what I did is I got to Penzance around maybe 2 in the afternoon, and I was talking to the lady at the Airbnb, and she was telling me like, oh, you can take this walk to go to St. Michael's Mount. That should be doable before the end of the day kind of thing. And she told me that next day I could do a coastal walk. So that's what I did. I started doing a walk. So this is Penzance, and you can take this walk all along the water, which is really nice. And this is St. Michael's Mount. And this kind of, the whole time you're walking, you can see the mount getting closer and closer. And it's kind of a really cool place. So you get there, and there's this little path that you can take to go see it. And what's interesting is just before you start going across the path, there's a sign that says high tide, 5:55 or something. There's a time for it. And I looked at it. It was 20 minutes away, and I was like, oh, I better hurry up. So make my way across, start taking a couple of pictures, and I'm looking at the time, making sure I'm not too late. I used the washroom. You got to do that, even though I'm on a schedule. I just walked a long time before I got there. So, but all of a sudden, there's 5 minutes to go, and I'm about to go back, and I realize the water is already above the path. So I'm like, oh. And the thing is, I wasn't the only one. There's a bunch of people in the same predicament as me. The good news is that the water was just this much at this point. So I was like, fine, take my shoes off, pull my pants, and start walking. It actually was really nice because the water was kind of refreshing, and it wasn't slippery. And what's interesting is that for some reason I did miss that. They would actually take a boat later on and bring people by boat. So I saw a boat come in a little later on with the people who got stranded on the island. Then I got a meal in this restaurant, which had an amazing view of the mount. I got it's funny, they suggested the catch of the day. I said, fine, I'll have it. And I asked what fish it was, and they said hawkfish. And I was like, oh, that's nice. And then I was doing the research for this presentation. I realized that hawkfish is actually a tropical fish that you fish in the south, not in England. So I was like, okay, so it was the catch of the day somewhere, but not that day, and not in Cornwall. I asked her what I should get for dessert that was kind of really Cornish. And she said, well, you should get the scone jam and Cornish clotted cream. This is what you want. And it's amazing. I don't know if you've tried Cornish clotted cream, but if you've not, you got to try it. It's so delicious. I think they make it by, you boil it or whatever, and you let it sit until it rises or whatever. I kind of read about it, but it's amazing. So it's kind of very rich and sweet. It's lovely. So the next day was the big walk that I was going to do. In fact, it was the biggest walk that I did during the whole trip. The first thing is that she had suggested I take a bus to Land's End. Land's End is actually the southernmost points of the mainland of England. And you'll see that I took a picture in front of the sign. You usually do that. You get the Land's End, take a picture there. And the thing is, in Scotland, when I was there 2 years ago, I took a picture at John O'Groats, which is the northernmost part of the mainland. So actually now I have pictures of both. I couldn't find my picture quickly for this presentation, otherwise I would have shown the other one. If you've seen, what's the car show that they do like in England? Anyway, yeah, Top Gear. They actually did one where the guy was starting from there and going all the way to the north in the fastest time possible. So if you've seen that episode, that's where they started, going all the way up. This place, there's a lead on the bus that told me like this place has become very commercial. It used to be just a barren land at the end of Land's End, and now it's just like 40 theaters and stuff like that. So they've made it like a really kind of commercial attraction. In fact, you needed to pay to get your picture taken in front of that. But it was early in the morning and there was nobody there, and I kind of took a selfie myself, but you have to pay otherwise. So took a quick walk, and then after that, I took a bus to Port Curnow. And that's where I was going to start my walk. So Port Curnow is really nice. They have a theater there called the Minack Theater, and it's actually built on the side of the mountain, and it's built right in the rock. So all of these are rocks right in the side of the mountain. And when you're watching, you got the stage there, but you got the ocean right in front, so it's really nice. There wasn't a show when I was there. This was just kind of you could do a visit. So as I said, this was the longest walk. I actually walked 32 kilometers straight that day for 6 hours and a half, and it was just amazing. So it was kind of like they were announcing a bit of rain that day, but I was lucky I was able to walk the whole way without any rain. And there's just some amazing, look, this is a guy there. The rocks were just so huge. So the walk was not very hard, except that once in a while you'd have to go down, and the trail would be at the bottom of the valley, and you'd have to go up again. So there was a lot of going down and going back up, right? But it was so awesome. Like the whole time, like you're seeing all these different rock formations, and it was just amazing. I was listening to an audiobook the whole way. It was very peaceful. And I'm just going to go a little quickly here. But if you look at it afterwards, I've got links to everywhere that this is along the path. So when you click on it, you'll see where these are along the path. And then at some point, I got to this little town that you would think is called Mousehole, right? But in Cornwall, everything is slightly named different, like it's pronounced differently than it's written. So this is actually Muzzle. So at first I was like, oh, I want to go to Mousehole, and people were like, Muzzle? I was like, oh yeah, Muzzle, yes. So this is a kind of cool little village, and they actually have, this was low tide, so it's kind of nice where they have all their boats attached with big chains, and then when the water comes up again, the boats just go back up. So that's kind of neat. Of course, when you're in Cornwall, you got to have a Cornish Pasty. This is just an amazing food that you need to get when you're there. What's interesting is the lady that I stayed at, they were two old ladies, and she explained to me that originally these were made for the miners going to the mines. So they would actually bake them a Cornish Pasty, but it was actually made of the two sections. One was a savory side, and one was like an apple pie side. And what they would do is they would have the reason it's so thick is they would actually just use it to hold while eating, but he would actually not eat that part. He would just eat the filling and everything inside, and he would discard the croute, if you like, around it. Okay, skip that. So I was about to leave Penzance and go to Truro, which is in the middle of Cornwall. So it's not on the water, and I was about to leave, and I was telling the lady, I'm going to Truro today, and she goes, well, have you gone to St. Ives? I was like, well, no. And she's like, well, you can't leave this area without going to St. Ives. I was like, okay. The thing is, I usually try to travel without my backpack on, so I usually, but that would mean that I would have to actually travel to that with my backpack because I was changing cities. I'm like, that's fine. She goes, well, you can actually leave your bag at, do you have a place at the info center where you can leave your bag, which I thought was surprising because, Jordan, you ran into that last year where nobody will take your bag anywhere nowadays with bombing and terrorism and everything. They just don't want to do it. So I double checked on the website. I think I even called and they said, yeah, we'll take your bag. So that's what I did. I went to St. Ives, and the lady was telling me it's a bit like the California of Cornwall, and it actually is. It's just beaches after beaches. I had this beer. It's actually apparently pronounced Caref. It's a Cornish beer. So St. Ives is just beaches after beaches. These are all different beaches that I'm showing you here. They're not the same ones. In fact, if you saw it on the map, they're all separate beaches. It was a bit windy, so I don't know if I would have been in the water at all that day, but They have some fancy chips flavor. And then I made my way to Truro. This was an Airbnb. Truro is a really nice little city. It's kind of in the heart of Cornwall. And they had the cathedral that was so big I couldn't even fit it. I tried it from many angles. There's no way I could get all of it in a picture. Because the thing is, there's a lot of buildings around. You can't move further back to get it in one picture. I went in, visited. They actually had an organ player the next day, and I kind of just watched it. And they had this TV that would actually show a live stream directly from the guy playing the organ. And what's interesting, I never realized that a lot of the really deep notes, they're actually playing them with the pedals. It's not just with the hands, right? Just like a regular piano. For some reason, I didn't think of that. But these are like massive pedals. This is the only cat picture in my presentation, but I've taken so many. Every time I would see a cat, I would take a cat picture. I went to see a show that night. So this is another walk I wanted to do in Cornwall. This one I had seen in the TV show. This one is a railroad walk. So basically the whole time you're walking along an old railway that they've taken the railroad out, but that leaves a nice path that people can use. This one, what's interesting is that it actually goes from the north of Cornwall all the way to the south of Cornwall. You're going from one water to the other water. This was about a 4.5-hour walk. It starts in Portread. This is also a nice little city with some beaches. And then you start the mining trail. And this was a really nice trail because every so often you'd have this sign. Every time it was kind of maybe confusing where you need to go, they always had that sign that told you exactly where to go and when to turn and everything. So it was very easy to follow. It actually went from up here all the way down here. Now, technically, it is the water from down there, but it's after it's inland from a little bit. So it's a bit of a cheat. It's not like you're going from here to here. You're going from water to water. This is... all of this is Cornwall. Now, all of the area of Cornwall is you can walk. And when I did my 6-hour walk, it was about from here to here. So you can see that if you walked all of it, that would take you a few weeks because that's 6 hours right here. This one was 4.5 hours. This was an easier walk, though, because it was kind of a straight walk versus up and down. Again, really nice landscape all the way through, some really cool stuff. This is an old mining trail, so they used to have those mines with like the chimney stacks and everything, so you get to spots where you see some old ruins of chimneys. Lots of wildlife. There's a viaduct that you had to walk through. You can see that there used to be an old viaduct. This one had a wood top on it, but it kind of burned down at some point, so they reconstructed a viaduct right next to it. And then once I was done, got back to Truro. And the next day I was moving from Truro all the way to Oxford. Now what I wanted to do is I wanted to see the Cotswolds. And I was thinking, like, what if I plan on spending 5 days in the Cotswold, but it rains for 5 days? And also it wasn't clear to me where I could stay in the Cotswold in order to see all the Cotswold. It's not obvious where you'd want to stay. So I looked at the map and I said, maybe I'll stay in Oxford, which is actually midway between London and the Cotswolds. So I'm like, an hour from Cotswolds, an hour from London. If it's raining, then I get the option of going to London instead, which is good because it actually rained for 5 days. It actually rained for 4 days. So I did get one tour one day that was in the Cotswolds. So I got to Oxford, and it turns out that Oxford is amazing. This is a city that if you have your camera out, you want to take a picture every minute. Like you look, oh, picture. Like you don't want to put your camera down. There's so many nice pictures to take. Everywhere you look, it's picture worthy. Sorry, I'm scrolling a little fast. Otherwise, we're going to run out of time. Except for that, I'm no ordinary developer. I had to take it. So this is the first day that I was going to go to the Cotswolds. So I look at the weather forecast. It said that it's going to start raining around noon. So I'm saying, that's fine. I'm going to get to Cotswold at 8. It's going to give me 4 hours to do some visiting. Get there, it's already. I was like, oh, great. So I quickly go around the city. The town is Morton and Marsh. So I went around, took a few pictures. It doesn't look like it's raining, but it was raining. And then I was like, you know what? Screw it. I took the train for 2 hours and went straight to London. And I thought, this is a day for visiting museum. So what I did is I went to the National Gallery. That's a place I wanted to go before and I'd never gone. As I said before, it's always free for those museums, but sometimes they have special exhibits inside that you can pay for. Like it's a subsection of it that you pay to go in. So I actually went into the subsection. I have no pictures of it because you couldn't take pictures. So you had to pay £10 to see an exhibit that you cannot take pictures of. And it was an exhibit on Michelangelo and somebody else. And it was totally not worth it. It wasn't worth £10. I did get a picture of this guy taking a nap, though. So is it worth £10? Maybe. I got some more Nando's. I can't get enough. Now, I was back at the house and I started watching. This was the launch of the Big Brother UK. I kind of watch it once in a while. It's a trashy. But the reason I'm mentioning it here is I'm actually later on, I actually went to a taping of the show. So next day, it was kind of a rainy day, so I stayed around Oxford. But at some point in the afternoon, it was kind of nice weather. So I'm like, great, I'm going to take advantage of that. This is the Thames Path. And you can actually walk along it. It goes for 300 kilometers from Bath all the way to London. But this was a small section of it that's around Oxford. So it was really nice. You start walking. And again, this is a bit like a canal walk. There's a nice path all along the canal that you can walk on. This is an unfortunately named restaurant that they have called the Isis Boathouse. I'm sure they're not happy about the Isis becoming famous. This was a lock. So they actually have locks on that path as well, where the boats have to go up and down. This one was a discount tour operator. And so as I'm walking, I'm not paying attention. It was kind of not raining at the time, but I didn't see that. I was walking towards this massive rain cloud. All of a sudden, it starts pouring on me. And I'm like, holy crap, I'm in the middle of this path. I've been walking for an hour. I'm like, where do I go from here? Take my phone out, try to see, is there a bus stop? So I go like, how do I get back to Oxford? So it actually made me walk about 10 minutes to a bus stop. Like I kind of went through, but I didn't have an umbrella with me. So I get to that bus stop, and I took a picture, which was really interesting. So this is actually just a picture facing this way. Like on one side is totally clear, and on the other side is this massive rain cloud. And that was the only time I got caught in the rain really good. Got back to Oxford, and then, so what I did is, because I looked at the weather forecast for 5 days, it seemed like it was going to rain every day except for like one day. So what I did is like, I'm not going to walk the Cotswold. It's just going to be too rainy. I can't chance it. So instead, I looked and I booked what I found this tour. It's kind of a private tour where you're only 6 people on the tour, and they take you around and they take you to all the different spots. And because it's a small vehicle, they can take you into places that a big bus tours can't. So that's the only time I booked a tour this time around, and they took us to some pretty amazing places in the Cotswold. And I was lucky because it didn't rain the whole day. So you got your nice thatched roofs. They're all over the place. This one was an interesting one. They have the cart wash, not a car wash. This was meant for the olden days where you had horse carriage. You'd actually pull your carriage in here and you'd actually wash your cart. So that's your classic cart wash. There's some really nice viewpoints, some churches. Oh, actually, you know what that is here? This is the little town that he used in the first Bridget Jones' Diary. So when they filmed the first film, or when they go there at Christmas, that's where they are. They're in this little town in this house. What's interesting is they actually filmed it during the summer. So all the snow that you see in the first Bridget Jones, it's all fake because they filmed it in the middle of the summer. What's interesting about a lot of these houses with thatch roof is they have fake little animals on top of it. So this is a fox, but I didn't want to put too many pictures, but they had ones with like a kangaroo and everything. It's really nice. So when you look up, you often see they have a little animal on it. This is kind of a stately home, and the reason I took it is she took us there. They had just filmed a series called Will that actually played by now, and it was about William Shakespeare, and they used that in one of the scenes. So it was kind of a nice area to see. Lunchtime, they brought us to this really old restaurant that was from the 1700s, I think. And I got the ploughman's lunch, which is kind of a staple in England. If you take a ploughman's lunch, it's always kind of like meat, cheese, a pickle, and some bread. So if you see that in a menu somewhere, you can expect something like that. It was really delicious. This here is actually a dove cut, where this is a little house where it's just built for doves. This was our tour guide. But basically, all of this isn't for humans. This is what it looks like inside. And this is all little niches and stuff for the doves to live. This one is really interesting. This is a Spitalfields. They used that in the old days. They would have 4 of these, and they would lift houses and places where they put grains. They would put it on top of that. And that's to prevent the rodents to go in, because the rodents couldn't go up there and get in because of the shape. So that prevented little rodents from going to your food stocks. This here is really is a cool place. That's where that's a church, and they say that this tree here was the inspiration for Tolkien for the trees in his stories. We're running out of time. Let's see if there's things I really want to cover. Actually, we're probably doing all right. So I was there during the election. So this was election day. I was still in Oxford, so people went out to vote. Again, there's so many cool things to see in Oxford. Highly recommend it. I also went to Cambridge 2 years ago, and if you had to choose between Cambridge and Oxford, I would choose Oxford. As I mentioned before, now this time I was moving from Oxford back into London. And I was staying at a Premier Inn for the last 3 days. And I actually booked some tickets. I was lucky to get tickets to go for the taping of Big Brother. This was the live eviction show. And the show is filmed at Elstree Studios, north of London. That's also where they filmed the first Star Wars trilogy. So they built a lot of those sound stages that were there were built for filming the original Star Wars trilogy. One of the stage now is they've renamed it to the George Lucas stage. So I don't know if you've watched Big Brother before, but we were there in the audience, and then somebody gets eliminated, comes out of the house, and comes down. So it was kind of cool. Got to chat with the host a little bit. And you can actually see me on the show. So I actually downloaded the show after the fact, and you can see me. I'm right there, and you can see me really excited right here. So that's kind of cool. It's cool to see a show and then be part of it. So one of the things is when I got to London, I had booked the last 3 days right next to Borough Market because I love Borough Market, and I was planning on buying some stuff to bring home because I had planned that. I was going to buy some stuff. In fact, I was going to buy a suitcase to put under the plane because I only had my backpack, but I was going to buy a small suitcase, check it in on the plane so I could have like liquids and stuff like that. So I get to London, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to the market because there was something that Annie wanted me to get. Like we had seen, she had bought this spread. It's kind of like Nutella, but it's like a very healthy one made with olive oil. So I wanted to go buy it. And I had seen it the beginning of my trip when I went to Borough Market, but I'm like, I'm not going to buy it and carry it around with me because I'm going to have it with me all the time. Go there. Of course, 2 days before, there was the London Bridge attack, or 3 days before, and people got stabbed around Borough Market. So the market was closed, at least for the rest of my trip until I think 3 days after I came back. So I couldn't buy anything. So it's of course for good reason. The merchant that I wanted to get the product from apparently are supposed to be at the Primrose Market on the Saturday. So I'm like, great, I'm going to go to Primrose. So I make my way to Primrose, which actually is kind of nice. You can see Primrose Hill. Get to the market, and the merchant is just not there. So it's a very small market. But I got to see Primrose. So that day I did a little bit more going around London. I really like this tube train here because it's one of the old ones, and it almost looks like a hobbit hole. It's very roundish. That night I had booked a play with Damian Lewis from Homeland. And I got to see him at the end. I don't have enough time, but this play was a crazy play, just the plot of that play. Read my description of it after the presentation. I decided to walk back to my hotel. It must have been garbage night in London, City by Night. This is the Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. It's a reproduction of the original Globe Theatre that was destroyed. So it's pretty much the way, I went to see a play there 2 years ago, and they have Shakespeare plays there. This was flowers that people had left right next to the Borough Market. So I'm going to skip Portsmouth. Just see, this is a city in the south of London. It was really nice. It's kind of a port city. I had to choose between that and Southampton. I chose this one. It was probably a good choice. It was kind of nice. It's worth a day trip. On the way back, this is they have like a bike rack at most of the train station. People just put their bikes and take the train somewhere. I wanted to show you this. This is on London Bridge. This is people because this happened 3 days before, so people had left flowers and lots of messages for the victims of people on the bridge. And what they did is they put these beams. Now, I don't know why they didn't have that before, but anybody could drive from the street into the pedestrian area. But now they're putting those big things on all of the bridges around London to prevent people from actually ramming people with their trucks.
I guess we will have to find out about it.
2 seconds. There's 2 slides. That's me on the plane. Look at that, just spread over 3 seats. And that's me getting a meal in Vancouver. And that's the end.